Hello, welcome back to the Hobbit reading thing. Man, I don't know. I don't know how to do these intro things. We are in Chapter 7, Queer Lodgings. Let's just jump right in. The next morning, Bilbo woke up with the early sun in his eyes. He jumped up to look at the time and to go put his kettle on and found he was not at home at all. So he sat down and wished in vain for a wash and a brush. He did not get either, nor tea, nor toast, nor bacon for his breakfast. Only cold mutton and rabbit. And after that he had to get ready for a fresh start. This time he was allowed to climb on an eagle's back and cling between his wings. The air rushed over him and he shut his eyes. The dwarves were crying farewells and promising to repay the lords of the eagles if they ever could. As off rose 15 great birds from the mountain's side. The sun was still close to the eastern edge of things. The morning was cool, and the mists in the valleys and hollows, and twinned here and there in the peaks and pinnacles of the hills. Bilbo opened his eye to a peep, and saw that the birds were already high up in the world far away, and the mountains were falling back behind them in the distance. He shut his eyes again and held on tighter. "Don't pinch," said his eagle. "You need not be frightened like a rabbit, even if you look rather like one. It is a fair morning with little wind. What is finer than flying?" Bilbo would have liked to say a warm bath and a late breakfast on the lawn afterwards, but he thought it better to say nothing at all, and let go his clutch just a tiny bit. After a good while, the eagles must have seen the point they were making for, even from their great height, for they began to go down, circling round and round in great spirals. They did this for a long while, and at last the hobbit opened his eyes again. The earth was much nearer, and below them trees that looked like oaks and elms, and wide grasslands, and a river running through it all. But cropping out the ground, right in the path of the stream which stopped itself about it, was a great rock, almost a hill of stone, like a last outpost of the distant mountains, or a huge piece cast miles in the great plain by some giant among giants. Quickly now to the top of the rock, the eagles swooped one by one and set their passengers down. "Farewell," they cried, "wherever you fare till your eyries receive at your journey's end." That is the polite thing to say among eagles. "May the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks," answered Gandalf, who knew the correct reply. And so they parted. And though the Lord of the Eagles became in after the days the king of all birds and wore a golden crown, and his 15 chieftains' golden collars, made of the gold that the dwarves gave them, Bilbo never saw them again, except high and far off in the battle of the 5 armies. But as that comes in the end of this tale, we will say no more about it just for now. There was a flat space on the top of the hill of stone, and a well-worn path with many steps leading down it to a river, across which a ford of huge flat stones led to the grassland beyond the stream. There was a little cave, a wholesome one with a pebbly floor, and at the foot of the steps and near the end of the stony fjord, here the party gathered and discussed what was to be done. "I always meant it to see you safe, if possible, over the mountains," said the wizard. "And now by good management and good luck I have done it. Indeed, we are in a good deal further east than I ever meant to come with you. For after all, this is not my adventure. I may look in on it again and after before all is done, but in the meanwhile I have some other pressing business to attend to." The dwarves groaned and looked most distressed, and Bilbo wept. They had begun to think Gandalf was going to come all the way and would be there to help them out of the most difficulties. "I am not going to disappear this very instant," said he. "I can give you a day or two, probably. I can help you going out of your pleasant plight. And I need a little help myself. We have no food and no baggage, and no ponies to ride. And you don't know where you are. Now I can tell you that. You are still some miles north of the path which we should have been following, if we had not left the mountains pass in a hurry. Very few people live in these parts unless they have come here since I was last down this way, which is some years ago. But there is someone that I know of who lives not far away. That somebody made the steps on the great rock of Carrock, I believe he calls it. He does not come here often, we certainly not in the daytime. And it is no good waiting for him. In fact, it would be very dangerous. We must go and find him, and if all goes well at our meeting, I think I shall be off and wish you, like the eagles, farewell wherever you're fair. They begged him not to leave them. They offered him dragon gold and silver and jewels, but he would not change his mind. We shall see, he said, and I think I have earned myself already some of your dragon gold when you've got it. After that they stopped pleading. Then they took off their clothes and bathed in the river, which was shallow and clear and stony at the ford. When they had dried in the sun, which was now strong and warm, they were refreshed, if still sore and a little hungry. Soon they crossed the ford, carrying the Hobbit, and then began to march through the long green grass down the lines in the wide-armed oaks and the tall elms. "And why is it called the Carrock?" said Bilbo, as he went along at the wizard's side. "He called it the Carrock because Carrock is his word for it. He calls things like that Carrocks, and this one is the Carrock because it's the only one near his home, and he knows it very well." "Who calls it? Who knows it?" "The somebody I spoke of, a very great person. You must all be very polite to when I introduced you. I shall introduce you slowly, 2 by 2, I think, and you must be careful not to annoy him, or heaven knows what will happen. He can be appalling when he's angry, though he is kind enough if humoured. Still, I warn you, he gets angry easily." The dwarves all gathered around when they heard the wizard talking like this to Bilbo. "Is that the person you are taking us to now?" they asked. "Couldn't you find someone more easy-tempered? Hadn't you explained this a bit clearer?" and so on. "Yes, it certainly is. No, I could not, and I was explaining very carefully," answered the wizard crossly. "If you must know more, his name is Beorn. He is very strong, and he is a skin-changer." "What? A fairy a man, and a man that calls rabbits conies when he doesn't turn their skins into squirrels?" asked Bilbo. "Good gracious heavens, no, said Gandalf. "Don't be a fool, Mr. Baggins, if you can help it. And in the name of all wonder, don't mention the word furrier again, as long as you're within 100 miles of his house. Nor rug, cape, tippet, muff, nor any other such unfortunate word. He is a skin-changer. He changes his skin. Sometimes he's a huge black bear. Sometimes he's a great strong black-haired man, with huge arms and a great beard. I cannot tell you more, though that ought to be enough. Some say he's a bear described from the great and ancient bears of the mountains that lived there before the giants came. Others say he's a man descended from the first men, who lived before Smaug or the other dragons came into this part of the world, and before the goblins came into the hills out of the north. I cannot say, though I fancy the last that is the true tale. He is not the sort of person to ask the question of. At any rate, he is on no enchantment of his own. He lives in his oak wood, and has a great wooden house. And as a man he keeps cattle and horses, which are nearly as marvellous as himself. They work for him and talk to him. He does not eat them, neither does he hunt or eat wild animals. He keeps hives and hives of great fierce bees, and lives most on cream and honey, and the bear ranges far and wide. Once I saw him sitting all alone on the top of the Carrock at night watching the moon sinking towards the misty mountains, and I heard him growl in the tongue of bears, "The day will come when they will perish, and I shall go back." That is why I believe he once came from the mountains himself. Bilbo and the dwarves now had plenty to think about, and they asked no more questions. They still had a long way to walk before them. Up slope and down dale they plodded. It grew very hot. Sometimes they rested under the trees. and Bilbo felt so hungry that he would have eaten acorns if any had been ripe enough yet to fall into the ground. It was the middle of the afternoon, and they noticed a great patch of flowers had begun to spring up, all the same kinds growing together as if they had been planted. Especially there was clover waving patches of cockscomb clover and purple clover, and wide stretches of short, wide, sweet honey-smelling clover. There was a buzzing and a whirring and droning in the air. Bees were busy everywhere, and such bees! Bilbo had never seen anything like them. If one was to sting me, he thought, I should swell up as big as I am. They were bigger than hornets, the drones were bigger than your thumb, a good deal, and the yellow bands on their deep black bodies shone like fiery gold. "We are getting nearer," said Gandalf. "We are on the edge of his bee pastures." After a while they came to a belt of tall and very ancient oaks, and beyond these to a high thorn hedge, which you could neither see nor scramble. "You had better wait here," said the wizard and the dwarves, "and when I call or whistle, begin to come after me. You will see the way I go, but only in pairs. Mind, about 5 minutes between each pair of you. Bomber is the fattest, and will only do for 2. He had better come alone and last. Come on, Mr. Baggins, there is a gate somewhere round this way." And with that he went off the hedge, taking the frightened hobbit with him. They soon came to a wooden gate, high and broad, beyond which they could see gardens and clusters of low wooden buildings, some thatched and made of unshaped logs, barns, stables, sheds, and a long, low wooden house. Inside, on the southward side of the great hedge, were rows and rows of hives with bell-shaped tops made of straw. The noise of the giant's bees flying to and fro and crawling in and out filled the air. The wizard and the hobbit pushed open the heavy creaking gate and went down with the wide track towards the house. Some horses, very sleek and well-groomed, trotted up across the gate and looked at them intently with very intelligent faces. Then off they galloped into the buildings. "They have gone to tell him the arrival of strangers," said Gandalf. Soon they reached a courtyard, 3 walls of which were formed with a wooden house and its 2 long wings. In the middle there was a line of great oak trunk with many loped branches beside it. Standing near it was a huge man with a thick beard and hair, and his great bare arms and legs with knotted muscles. He was clothed in a tunic of wool down to his knees, and leaning on a large axe. The horses were standing by him with their noses to his shoulder. "Ugh, there they are," he said to the horses. "Oh, they don't look dangerous. You can be off," he said with laugh. He laughed a great rolling laugh, put down his axe and came forward. "Who are you, and what do you want?" he asked gruffly, standing in front of them and towering tall above Gandalf. As for Bilbo, he could easily have trotted through his legs without ducking his head to miss the fringe of the man's brown tunic. "I am Gandalf," said the wizard. "Never heard of him," growled the man. "And what's this little fellow?" he said, stooping down to frown at the hobbit with his bushy eyebrows. "That is Mr. Baggins, a hobbit and a good family of unimpeachable reputation," said Gandalf. Bilbo bowed. He had no hat to take off, and was painfully conscious of his many missing buttons. "I am a wizard," continued Gandalf. "I have heard of you, if you have not heard of me, but perhaps you have heard of my good cousin Radagast, who lives near the southern borders of Mirkwood." "Yes, not a bad fellow as wizards go, I believe. I used to see him now and again," said Beorn. "Well, now I know who you are, or who you say you are. What do you want?" "To tell you the truth, we have lost our luggage and nearly lost our way, and are rather in need of help, or at least advice. I may say that we have a rather bad time with goblins in the mountains." "Goblins?" said the big man less gruffly. "Oh, so you have been having trouble with them, have you? What did you go near them for?" We did not mean to. They surprised us at night, which we were there in a pass we had tried to cross. We were coming over the lands over west into these countries as is a long tale."
"Then you had better come inside and tell me more of it, if it won't take all day,"
said the man, leading them way through a dark door that opened to the courtyard into the house. Following him, they found themselves in a wide hall with a fireplace in the middle. Though it was summer, there was a wood fire burning and the smoke rising to the blackened rafters in search of a hole above it, and came through another smaller door into a sort of veranda propped on wooden posts made of a single tree trunks. It faced south and was still warm and filled with the light of the westering sun which slanted it, and fell golden on the garden full of leaves and flowers that came right up to the steps. Bleh. Here they sat on wooden benches while Gandalf began his tale, and Bilbo swung his dangling legs and looked at the flowers in the garden, wondering what their names would be, as he had never seen half of them before.
"I was coming over the mountains with a friend or two," said the wizard. "Or two? I can only see one, and a little at that," said Beorn.
"Well, to tell you the truth, I did not like to bother you with the lot of us until I found out you were busy. I will give a call if I may."
"Go on, call away."
So Gandalf gave a long, shrill whistle, and presently Thorin and Dori came round the house by the garden path and stood bowing low before them.
"1 or 3, you meant, I see," said Beorn. "But these aren't hobbits. They are dwarves."
"Thorin Oakenshield, at your service. Dori, at your service," said the two dwarves, bowing again.
"I don't need your service, thank you," said Beorn. "But I expect you need some mine, and I am not over fond of dwarves. But if it is true you are Thorin,
son of Thrain, son of Thor, I believe,
and that your companion is respectable, and that you are enemies of the goblins and not up to any mischief in my lands, what are you up to, by the way?"
They are on their way to visit the land of the fathers, away east beyond Mirkwood," put in Gandalf. "And it is entirely accident that we are in your lands at all. We were crossing by the high pass that I should have brought us to a road that lies south of your country, when we were attacked by the evil goblins, as I was about to tell you."
"Go on telling, then," said
Beorn, who was never very polite. "There was a terrible storm, and stone giants were out there hurling rocks, and at the head of the pass we took refuge into a cave, the Hobbit and I, and several of our companions."
"Do you call 2 several?"
"Well, no, as a matter of fact there were more than 2.
"Where are they? Killed, eaten, gone home?"
"Well, no, they don't seem to all have come when I whistled. Shy, I expect. You see, we are very much afraid that we are rather a lot for you to entertain."
"Go on, whistle again. I am in for a party, it seems, and 1 or 2 won't make much difference,"
growled Beorn. Gandalf whistled again, but Nori and Ori were almost there before he had stopped. For if you remember, Gandalf had told them to come in pairs every 5 minutes.
"Hello," said Beorn. "You came pretty quick from where you were hiding. Come on, my jack-in-the-boxes."
"Nori, at your service. Ori, at—" they began, but Beorn interrupted them.
"Thank you. When I want your help, I will ask for it. Sit down and let's go on with this tale, or it will be supper time before it's ended."
"As soon as they were asleep," went on Gandalf, "a crack in the back of the cave opened. Goblins came out and grabbed the hobbits and the dwarves and our troop of ponies."
"Troop of ponies? What were you traveling, a circus? Or were you carrying lots of goods? Or do you always call 6 a troop?"
"Oh, no. As a matter of fact, there were more than just 6 ponies, for there were more than 6 of us, and, well, here are 2 more." Just at that moment, Balin and Dwalin appeared and bowed so low their beards swept the stone floor. The big man was frowning at first, but they did their very best to be frightfully polite and kept on nodding and bending and bowing and waving their hoods before their knees in proper dwarf fashion, till he stopped frowning and burst into a chuckling laugh. They looked so comical.
"Troop was right," he said. "A fine comic one. Come in, my merry men, and what are your names? I don't want your service just now, only your names. And then sit down and stop wagging."
"Balin and Dwalin," they said, not daring to be offended, and sat flop on the floor, looking rather surprised.
"Now, go on again," said Beorn to the wizard.
"Where was I? Oh, yes, I was not grabbed. I killed a goblin or two with a flash."
"Good," growled Beorn. "It is some good being a wizard, then."
"And I slipped inside the crack before it was closed. I followed down the main hall, which was crowded with goblins. The great goblin was there with a thirsty 30 or 40 armed guards. I thought to myself, even if they were not all chained together, what can a dozen do against so many?"
"A dozen? That's the first time I've heard 8 called a dozen. Or do you still have more jacks that haven't yet come out of their boxes?"
"Well, yes, there seem to be a couple more here now. Fili and Kili, I believe," said Gandalf, as these two now appeared and stood smiling and bowing.
"That's enough," said Beorn. "Sit down and be quiet. Now go on, Gandalf."
So Gandalf went on with the tale until he came to the fight in the dark and the discovery of the back gate, and their horror when they found that Mr. Baggins had been mislaid. We counted ourselves and found there was no hobbit, or there was only 14 of us left.
14? That's the first time I've heard that from 10 to leave 14. You mean 9, or else you haven't told me the names of all your party.
Well, of course you haven't seen Owen and Gloin yet, and bless me, here they are. I hope you'll forgive them for bothering you."
"Oh, let 'em all come. Hurry up, come along, you two, and sit down. But look here, Gandalf. Even now we've only got yourself and 10 dwarves and the hobbit was lost. That only makes 11, plus 1 mislaid. And not 14, and us wizards count differently to other people. But now please, get on with the tale."
Beorn did not show it more than he could help, but he really had begun to get very interested. You see, in the old days, he had known very part of the mountains that Gandalf was describing. He nodded and growled, and when he heard the hobbit's reappearance and the scrambling down the stone slide and the wolf ring in the woods, when Gandalf came to climbing the trees and the wolves all underneath, he got up and strode about and muttered,
"I wish I would have been there. I would have given him more than just fireworks."
"Well, son Gandalf, very glad to see this tale was making a good impression."
"I did the best I could.
There we were, with all the wolves going mad underneath us and the forest beginning to blaze in places, when the goblins came down from the hills and discovered us. They yelled with delight and sang songs of making fun of us. 15 birds and 5 fir trees."
"Good heavens," growled Beorn. "Don't pretend that goblins can't count. They can. 12 isn't 15, and they know it."
"And so do I. There were Bifur and Bofer as well. I haven't ventured to introduce them before, but here they are." In came Bifur and Bofer. "And me," gasped Bomber, pulling up behind. He was very fat, and also angry he was being left till last. He refused to wait the 5 minutes, and followed immediately after the other two.
"Well, now there are 15 of you. And since goblins can count, I suppose that's all there were up there in those trees. Now perhaps we can finish this story without any more interruptions."
Mr. Baggins saw how clever had Gandalf been. Interruptions had made Beorn more interested in the story, and the story kept them from sending the dwarves off at once like a suspicious beggars. He never invited people into his house, if he could help it. He had very few friends, and they lived a good way away, and he never invited more than a couple of those in his house at a time. Now he had got 15 strangers sitting in the porch. By the time Wizard finished his tale and told of the eagle's rescue and how they had all been brought to Carrock, the sun had fallen behind the peaks of the Misty Mountains, and the shadows were long in Beorn's garden.
"A very good tale," said he. "The best I've heard in a long while. If all beggars could tell such a good one, they might find me kinder." You may be eating it all up, of course, but you deserve a story for the deserve a supper for the story all the same. Let's have something to eat."
"Yes, please," they all said together. "Yes, thank you very much." Inside the hall it was now quite dark. Beorn clapped his hands and trotted 4 beautiful white ponies and several large-bodied grey dogs. Beorn said something in them in a queer language, like animal noises turned into talk. They went out again, and soon came back carrying torches in their mouths, and which they lit the fire and struck a low branches on the pillars in the hall and the central hearth. The dogs could stand on their hind legs when they wished, and carry things with their forefeet. Quickly they got out boards and trestles from the side walls and set up near the fire. Then ba 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 was heard, and in came some snow-white sheep led by a large coal-black ram. One bore white cloth embroidered at the edges with figures of animals. Others bore on their broad backs trays with bowls and platters, and knives and wooden spoons, which the dogs took and quickly laid out on the trestle tables, which were very low enough for even Bilbo to sit comfortably. Beside them a pony pushed 2 low-seated benches with wide rush bottoms and little short thick legs for Gandalf and Thorin, while at the far end he put Beorn's big black chair at the same sort, in which he sat his great legs stuck far out under the table. These were all the chairs he had in his hall, and probably had them low, they had not forgotten. Had them low like tables for the convenience of the wonderful animals that waited on him. What did they rest on? They were not forgotten. The other ponies came rolling round drum-raped sections of logs, smoothed and polished, and low enough for even Bilbo. Soon they were all seated at Beorn's table, and the hall had not seen such a gathering for many a year. There they had a supper, or a dinner, such as they had not had since they left the last homely house in the west, and said goodbye to Elrond. The light of the torches in the fire flickered about them, and on the table were 2 tall red beeswax candles. All the time they ate, Beorn put in his deep rolling voice, told tales of the wild lands of his side of the Misty Mountains, and especially of the dark and dangerous wood that lay outstretched far to the north and south, a day's ride before them, bearing there first to the east, the terrible forest of Mirkwood. The dwarves listened and shook their beards, for they knew they soon must venture into that forest, and that after the mountains was the worst part of the perils they had to pass down before they came to the dragon's stronghold. When dinner was over, they began to tell tales of their own, but Beorn seemed to be growing drowsy and paid little heed to them. They spoke most of gold, silver, and jewels, and making of things by smithcraft, and Beorn did not appear to care for such things. There were no things gold or silver in his hall, and the few save the knives were made of metal or all. There sat a long table with their wooden drinking bowls filled with mead. The dark night came on outside. The fires in the middle of the hall were built with fresh logs, and torches were put out. And they still sat in the light of the trees, dancing flames with the pillars of the house standing tall behind them, arid dark at the top of the trees like the forest. Whether it was magic or not, it seemed to Bilbo that he had heard a sound like a wind in the branches stirring in the rafters, and the hoots of owls. Soon he began to nod to sleep, with the voices seemed to grow far away, until he woke with a start. The great door had creaked and slammed. Beorn was gone. The dwarves were sitting cross-legged around the fire, and presently he began to sing. Some of the verses were like this, but there were many more, and their singing went on for quite a while. Once again, I am skipping the song, because, I don't know, I just don't want to do it. Also, I'm not, in the best health. Well, I'm fine, but it's just my nose is a bit stuffy. Anyway, Bilbo began to nod again. Suddenly up stood Gandalf.
"It is time for us to sleep," he said. "For us, but not, I think, for Beorn. In this hall we can rest sound and safe, but I warn you all not to forget what Beorn said before he left us. You must not stray outside until the sun is up, on your peril."
Bilbo found the beds had already been laid outside of the hall, on a sort of raised platform between the pillars and the outer wall. For him there was little matters of straw and woolen blankets. He snuggled into them very gladly. Summertime though it was, the fire burned low and he fell asleep. Yet in the night he woke. The fire had now sunk to a few embers. The dwarves and Gandalf were all asleep, to judge by their breathing. A splash of white on the floor came through the high moon, which was peering down through the smoke hole in the roof. There was a growling sound outside, and a noise as of some great animal scuffling at the door. Bilbo wondered what it was, and whether it could be Beorn in enchanted shape, and if he would come as a bear and kill him. He dived under the blankets and hid his head and fell asleep in the last spite of his fears. It was full morning when he woke. One of the dwarves had fallen over him in the shadows where he lay. He had rolled out under with a bump on the platform to the floor. It was Beaufort, and he was getting grumbling about it, when Bilbo opened his eyes. "Get up, lazy bones," he said, "or there will be no breakfast left for you." Up jumped Bilbo. "Breakfast," he cried. "Where's breakfast?" "Mostly inside us," answered the other dwarves who were moving around the hall. "What is left is out on the veranda. We have been looking out for Beorn ever since the sun got up, but there is no sign of him anywhere, though we found breakfast laid out as soon as we went out." "Where is Gandalf?" asked Bilbo, moving off to find something to eat as quick as he could. "Oh, out and about somewhere," they told him. But he saw no sign of the wizard all that day until the evening, just before sunset, when he walked into the hall, where the Hobbit and dwarves were having supper, waiting on by Beorn's wonderful animals, as they had all been. Of Beorn they had seen and heard nothing of the night before, and they were all getting puzzled. "Where is our host, and where have you been all day yourself?" they all cried. "One question at a time, none till after supper." "I haven't had a bite since breakfast." At last Gandalf pushed away his plate and jug. He had eaten 2 whole loaves with masses of butter and honey and clotted cream, and drunk a least bit of quart of mead, and took out his pipe. "I will answer the second question first," he said. "But bless me, this is a splendid place for smoke rings." Indeed, for a long time they could get nothing more out of him. He was so busy sending smoke rings dodging round pillars of the hall, changing them in all sorts of different shapes and colours, and then sending him out, then chasing last one after another, and out of the hole in the roof. They must have looked very queer from the outside, popping out in the air one after another, green, blue, red, yellow, silver, grey, white, big ones, little ones dodging through the big ones and joining into figure eights, and going off in little flocks of birds in the distance. "I have been picking bear tracks," he said at last. "There must have been regular bears meeting outside here last night. I soon saw that Beorn could not have made them all. There were far too many of them, and they were various sizes, too. I should say there were little bears, large bears, ordinary bears, and gigantic big bears, all dancing outside from dark to nearly dawn. They came from almost every direction except from the west over the river. From the mountains in that direction only one set of footprints led, none coming, only ones going away from here. I followed these as far as Carrock, and they disappeared into the river. But the water was too deep and strong behind the rock for me to cross. It is easy enough, as you remember, to get from the bank of Carrock to the ford, but on the other side is a cliff standing from the swirling channel. I had to walk miles before I found a place where the river was wide and shallow enough for me to wade and swim, and then miles back to where the tracks begin. But by that time it was too late for me to follow them far. They went straight off in the direction of the pine woods and east of the Meaty Mountains, where we had our pleasant little party with the wargs of the night before last. And now I think I have answered your first question too," ended Gandalf, and he sat a long while silent. Bilbo thought he knew what this wizard meant. "What shall we do?" he cried. "If he leads all the wargs and goblins down here, we shall all be caught and killed. I thought you said he was not 9 of their friends." "And so did I. And don't be silly. You had better go to bed. Your wits are getting sleepy." The hobbit felt quite crushed, and there seemed to be nothing else to do, so he did go to bed. And while the dwarves were still singing songs and dropped asleep, still puzzling his little head about Beorn, They dreamed of a dream of hundreds of black bears dancing slow, heavy dances round and round in the moonlight in the courtyard. Then he woke up when everyone else was asleep, and he heard the same scraping, scuffling, snuffling, and growling as before. Next morning they were all wakened by Beorn himself.
"So here you still are," he said.
He picked up the hobbits and laughed.
"Not eaten up by wargs or goblins or wicked bears yet, I see,"
as he poked Mr. Baggin's waistcoat most disrespectfully.
"Little bunnies get nice and fat again on bread and honey," he chuckled. "Come and have some more."
So they all went to breakfast with him. Beorn was most jolly for a change. Indeed, he seemed to have a splendidly good humor and set them all laughing with his funny stories. Nor did they have to wonder long where he had been or why he was so nice to them, for he told them himself. He had been over in the river and right back up the mountains, from which he could tell he could travel quickly, in bear shape at any rate. From the burnt wolf glade he had soon found that the part of the story was true, but he had found far more than that, and caught a warg and goblin wandering in the woods. From these he had gotten news. The goblin patrols were still hunting with the wargs for the dwarves, and they were fiercely angry because of the death of the great goblin, and also because of the burning of the chief's wolf's nose, and the death of the wizard's fire caused many of his chief's servants. So much they told him when he forced them, but he guessed there were more wickedness than this afoot, and that a great raid of the whole goblin army with their wolf allies into the land shadowed by the mountains might soon be made to find the dwarves, or to take vengeance on the men and creatures that lived there, and who they thought must be sheltering them.
"It was a good story, that of yours," said Beorn, "but I like it still better now. I am sure it is true. You must forgive me my not taking your word. If you lived near the edge of Mirkwood, you would take the word of no one, and do not well as your brother or better. And I can only say that I have hurried home as fast as I could to see that you are safe, and to offer any help I can. I shall think more kindly of dwarves as after this. Killed the great goblin, he chuckled fiercely to himself.
"What did you do with the goblin and the warg?" asked Bilbo suddenly.
"Well, come and see," said Beorn.
They followed round the house. A goblin's head was stuck outside the gate and a warg skin nailed to the tree beyond. Beorn was a fierce enemy, but now he was their friend, and Gandalf thought it was wise to tell them their whole story and the reason of their journey, so that they could give the most help he could offer. This is what he promised to do for them. He would provide ponies for each of them and a horse for Gandalf, for their journey to the forest, and he would lade them with food to last out for weeks and for care, and packed so as be easy to possible to carry nuts, flowers, sealed jars of dried fruit, and red earthenware pots of honey, and twice-baked cakes that would keep good for a good long time, and on a little which they could march far. The making of these was one of his secrets, but honey was in them, as most of his foods, and they were good to eat, though they made one thirsty. Water, he said, they would not need to carry this side of the forest, for there were streams and sprigs along the road.
"But your way through Mirkwood is dark, dangerous, and difficult. Water is not easy to find in there, nor food. The time is not yet come for nuts,
though it may be past and gone indeed before you can get to the other side.
And nuts are about all that grows there fit for food. In the wild, the wild things are dark, queer, and savage. I will provide you skins for carrying water, and I will give you some bows and arrows. But I doubt very much whether anything you find in Mirkwood will be wholesome to eat or drink. There is one stream there, I know, black and strong, which crosses the path, that you should neither drink nor bathe in, for I have heard that it carries enchantment and great drowsiness and forgetfulness. And in the dim shadows of that place I do not think you will shoot anything, wholesome or unwholesome, without straying from the path. That you must not do for any reason. That is all the advice I can give you. Beyond the edge of the forest I cannot help you much. You must depend on your luck and your courage, and the food I sent with you. At the gate of the forest, I must ask you to send your horse and my ponies, but I wish you all speed, and my house is open to you if you ever come back this way again."
They thanked him, of course, with many bows and sweepings and their hoods, and with many "At your service, O master of the wide wooden halls." But their spirits sank at his grave words, and they all felt that the adventure was far more dangerous than they had thought. While all the time, even if they had passed the peril of the road, the dragon was still waiting at the end. All that morning they were busy with preparations. Soon after midday they ate with Beorn for the last time, and after the meal they mounted their steeds and was lending them and bidding him many farewells as they rode off from the gate at a good pace. As soon as they left the high hedges of the east fenced land, they turned north and then bore off to the northwest. By his advice, they were no longer making for the main forest road to the south of the land. Had they followed the pass, their path would have led them downstream to the mountains that join the great river south of the Carrock. At that point, there was a deep fjord which they might have passed if they had still had their ponies, and beyond that track led to the skirts of the woods and the entrance of the old forest road. But Beorn warned them that way was not often used by the Gothans, while the forest road itself, he had heard, was overgrown and disused at the eastern end and led to impassable marshes where the paths had long been lost. Its eastern opening had also always been difficult far to the south, at the Lonely Mountain, and would still have left them with a long and difficult northward march when they got to the other side. North of the Carrock at the edge of Mirkwood drew closer to the borders of the great river, and through here the mountains drew down nearer. Beorn advised them not to take this way, for at a place a few days' ride south of the north of the Carrock was the gate of the little-known pathway through Mirkwood that led almost straight towards the many lonely mountains.
"The goblins," Beorn had said, "will not dare to cross the great river for 100 miles north of the Carrock, nor come near my house. It is well protected at night, but I should ride fast, for if they make their raid, soon they will cross the river south, and scour all the edge near the forest, so it to be cut you off. And the wargs run swifter than ponies, for that is what they will least expect, and they will have the long ride to catch you. Be off now, as you may."
That is why they were riding in silence, galloping whenever the ground was grassy and smooth, and the mountains dark on their left. In the distance the line of the river with its trees drawing ever closer. The sun had only turned west, and when they started until the evening lay golden on the land below about them. It was difficult to think of pursuing goblins behind. When they had put many miles between them and Beorn's house, they began to talk and sing again, and forget the dark forest path that lay in front. But in the evening, when the dusk came on and the peaks of the mountains glowered, which then came a howl of hunting wolves and the cries of goblins, still the next morning dawned bright and fair again. There was an autumn-like mist upon the ground where air was chill, but soon the sun rose red in the east, and the mist vanished, while the shadows were long, and they were off again. So they rode on now for 2 more days, and all while they saw nothing but save grass and flowers and birds and scattered trees, and occasionally small herds of red deer browsing or sitting on the noon shade. Sometimes Bilbo saw the horns of harts sticking out the long grass, and at first they thought they were dead tree branches. That third evening they were not so eager to press on, for Beorn had said that they should reach the forest gate early on the 4th day. That they rode still forward to the after dusk and into the night beneath the moon. As the light faded, Bilbo thought he saw away to the right on the left, or to the left, the shadowy form of Great Bear prowling along in the same direction. But if he dared to mention it to Gandalf, the wizard only said, "Hush! Take no notice." Next day they started before dawn. Through their night they had been short. As soon it was light, they could see the forest coming as it were to meet them, or waiting for them like a black and frowning wall upon them. The land began to slope up and up, and it seemed to the hobbit that a silence began to draw in upon them. Birds began to sing less. There were no more deer, nor even rabbits to be seen. By the afternoon they reached the eaves of Mirkwood, and were resting almost beneath the great overhanging boughs of its outer trees. The trunks were huge and gnarled, and their branches twisted. The leaves were dark and long, ivy grew on them and trailed along the ground.
"Well, here is Mirkwood," said Gandalf, "the greatest of the forests of the northern world. I hope you like the look of it. Now you must send back these excellent ponies you have borrowed."
The dwarves were inclined to grumble at this, but the wizard told them they were fools.
"Beorn is not as far off as you seem to think, and you had better keep to your promises anyway, for he is a bad enemy. Mr. Baggins' eyes are sharper than yours. If you had not seen each night or dark the great bear going along with us or sitting far into the moon watching all camps, not only to guard and guide you, but to keep an eye on the ponies too. Beorn may be your friend, but he loves his animals as his children. You don't want to guess what kindness he has in show, letting dwarves ride on them so far and so fast, nor what would happen to you if you tried to take them into the forest."
"What about the horse, then?" said Thorin. "You don't mention of sending that back."
"I don't, because I am not sending it."
"What about your promise, then?"
"I will look after that. I am not sending the horse back. I am riding it."
Then they all knew Gandalf was going to leave them at the very edge of Mirkwood, and they were in despair. But nothing could be said that would change his mind.
Now we had all let this all out before, when we landed on the Carrock," he said. "It's no use arguing. As I told you, some pressing business away in the south, and I am already late, though bothering you with people. We may meet again before all is over, and then again, in course, we may not. That depends on your luck, and on your courage and sense. I am sending Mr. Baggins with you. I have told you before that he has a lot more about him than you guess, and you will find that before long. So cheer up, Bilbo, and don't look so glum. Cheers to Thorin and company. This is your expedition, all. Think of the treasure at the end, and forget the forest and the dragon. At any rate, until your tomorrow morning."
When tomorrow morning came, he still said the same. So now there was nothing left to do but to fill their water skins at the clear spring they found close to the forest gate, and unpack the ponies. They distributed their packages as fairly as they could, though Bilbo thought there was a lot of his lot was wearisomely heavy, and did not like the idea of trudging for miles and miles with that on his back.
"Don't you worry," said Thorin. It will get lighter all too soon. Before long, I expect we shall all wish our packs heavier when the food begins to run short."
Then at last they all said goodbye to their ponies and turned their heads for home. Off they trotted gaily, seemingly very glad to be put towards the shadows of Mirkwood. As they went away, Bilbo could have sworn that a thing like a bear left the shadow of the trees and shambled off quickly after them. Now Gandalf too said farewell. Bilbo sat on the ground, being very unhappy and wishing he was beside the wizard on his tall horse. He had gone inside the forest after breakfast, a very poor one, and it seemed dark in there in the morning as the night, and very secret, a sort of watching, waiting feeling, he said to himself.
"Goodbye," said Gandalf to Thorin, "and goodbye to you all, goodbye. Straight through the forest is your way now. Don't stray off the track. If you do, it is 1,000 to 1 that you will ever find it again, and never get out of Mirkwood. And then I don't suppose I or anyone else will ever see you again."
"Do we really have to go through?" groaned the hobbit.
"Yes, you do," said the wizard. "If you want to get to the other side, you must either go on or give up your quest. And I am not allowing you to back out now, Mr. Baggins. I'm ashamed of you for thinking of it. You have to look after these dwarves for me," he laughed.
No, said Bilbo. "I didn't mean that. I mean, is there no way round?"
"There is. If you gotta go 200 miles or so out of your way north, and twice that distance south." But you wouldn't get a safe path even there. There are no safe paths in this part of the world. Remember, you're on the edge of the wild now, and in for all sorts of fun wherever you go. Before you get round Mirkwood in the north, you would be right upon the slopes of the Grey Mountains, and they are simply stiff with goblins, hobgoblins, and the rest of the world's description. Before you could get round to the south, you'd be in the land of the necromancer, and even you, Bibbo, won't need to tell you the tales of the black sorcerer. I don't advise you going anywhere near the place overlooked by his dark tower. Stick to the forest track, keep your spirits up, and hope for the best. And with a tremendous slice of luck, you may come out one day and see the long marshes lying below you, and beyond them, high in the east, the lonely mountain where dear old Smaug lives, though I hope he is not expecting you. Very comforting you are, to be sure, growled Thorin. Goodbye. If you won't come with us, you had better get off without any more talk. Goodbye, then, and really goodbye, said Gandalf, as he turned and his horse rode down to the west. But he could not resist the temptation to have a last word. Before he had passed quite out of hearing, he turned his hands to his mouth and called to them. They heard his voice come out finally. Goodbye, be good. Take care of yourselves, and do not leave the path. And he galloped away, and was soon lost to sight. Oh, goodbye and go away, grunted the dwarves, and all the more angry because they were really filled with dismay at losing him. Now began the most dangerous part of the journey. They all shouldered the heavy pack, and the water skin was their share, then turned from the light that lay on the outsides and plunged into the forest. And that is the end of Chapter 7.